All right, so welcome to today's webinar, Creating the Comeback Downtown, Building Community Experiences People Come Back For, right? Everybody wants that downtown that people are visiting, word of mouth, going around, telling everyone how great it is, right? So my name is Ani Chakaspanian, the Programs Manager at Connecticut Main Street Center. And today's webinar, again, it was about creating a downtown experience that keeps people coming back for more. But just a few words from us. Connecticut Main Street Center is a statewide nonprofit working in all types and sizes of downtowns across the state to help establish and maintain a vibrant Main Street through helping communities improve their management capacity and implementing best practices. Our website's on the end, on the bottom. It says learn more about connectedmainstreet.org. You could see our programs and events as you search through the website. We offer field services, education and training, events, advocacy, and other services to carry out our mission. We provide best practices and capacity building exercises and programs for municipalities. Again, all throughout the state, doesn't matter what size you are. Again, check out our website for some more information. We're really grateful for our sponsors and funding partners that make this work possible. Connecticut Main Street's founding sponsors are Eversource and the Connecticut Department of Economic and Community Development. And also, today's webinar is brought to you by Liberty Bank Foundation. We're really grateful for their support. And with that, I'm going to introduce our guest speakers, Nick Henkin and Matt Mason of Brighter. This is going to be a really exciting webinar, and I'm looking forward to kind of seeing what they have going on.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you so much. Really appreciate that, Ani, here. And we're going to make sure that I'm sharing. Hopefully that's showing up for everybody and keeping chat open. And so, yeah, hi, everyone. I'm Matt Mason. I'm excited to chat with you today. We're going to be talking about the repeatable downtown. I'm the founder of Brighter, and my co-founder Nick is here as well. We're a software platform that puts an info booth in everyone's pocket. But more importantly, first, I want to tell you why I do what I do and why I'm even here to talk about shaping experiences that bring people back. And one other thing, though, at the end of the chat today, I'm going to have 3 words or phrases that I'm going to leave you with. And my hope is that these are going to guide you after our chat today. So years ago, many years ago, it feels like now in a past life, I was a teacher, and I loved traveling to visit friends, driving from place to place. I just loved being on the road and experiencing different small towns. And during that time, I learned about destination marketing and seeing the people that are passionate about their communities and ultimately what really made them special. So, before I really dive into the repeatable downtown, want to make sure. I want to ask you all, like, what do you think makes a downtown great? And so that's something where if you want to share it in the chat, would love to see what you personally think makes a downtown great. Or if you just want to write it to yourselves and just hold on to it, that's fine. I want to give you a little bit of time here just to think about, like, what do you think? Oh, there's an echo. If there's an echo, I will try to fix my audio here. Thank you for flagging that. Let's see.
All right, I
Is
see.
there still an echo?
Is
Just wanted to
there?
double check here. Bill, is there still an echo? I just saw that in the chat there. It's okay if not. So, but yeah, so
We see
walkable things
walkable,
to do.
mixed-use
Yeah.
planning and development, continuous storefronts, some green spaces, restaurants, bars and theaters, energy and vibrancy. Those really good words.
Yeah, no, these are great. These are great. And so what I really want you to do is to hold on to these things, to hold on to these ideas of really what makes really what makes a great downtown. Because the interesting thing, and this is what we've seen, is that the problem is that downtowns are not short on ideas. Are not short on ideas or things that they can point out to that makes them special. And I'm sure every one of us has a folder of ideas. I keep notes on my phone, and I'll wake up in the middle of the night. Either sometimes I'm texting Nick, or I'm putting a note to myself, or I'm putting in my calendar. And so it's not the ideas that are scarce. It's the way to tell which ideas are ultimately worth repeating. And for us, what we've seen is that what often happens is we'll see something in another town, right? And we are like, hey, this is working over there. So we want to import it. And we set it all up and we get everything, and we get really excited, and then it lands flat. Because the hard part is oftentimes it wasn't rooted in anything local and we're just copying it. And so the problem is that what we've seen, Nick and myself, is we've seen that boards are expecting something new every year. There's grant cycles that are rewarding novelty over pointing to things that are working year over year. And oftentimes it can feel like, hey, we did this last year. And for some folks, like that can feel like failure. And so I'm sure everyone in this room has felt at least one of these things, if not all of those three. So the way that we think of repeatable is not we put it on the calendar every year, more so that it's repeatable because people are coming back on their own, more often without a new grant or a theme or even really needing a fresh marketing push. For us, repeatable, when we think about it, is that they're excited to participate and can't wait to do it all over again. They're putting it in their calendar because they want to come back next year. Or more importantly, they're putting your downtown in their calendar, putting their downtown on in their notes to remind themselves because they want to come back to it. And it's something that they really, really are passionate about and get excited about. So when we're talking about repeatable, it's not just something where it's like, hey, this is just the same thing every single year, and then you could set your watch to it. But instead it's something that people are getting excited about. So for us, these are three things that, we would want you to ask when you're looking at your calendar. And they're also going to be kind of the things that are going to guide us through the rest of the discussion. The three things right here are, is it rooted? Does it run without heroics? And ultimately, and the most important one of these is, are you able to tell if it worked? And these are the three questions I kind of want to, hang on here just for a sec so that you can see them, because they are really going to shape the rest of this discussion. And it's going to help us ultimately determine sort of those three words that I'm going to leave you with at the end. So when we think of something, is it rooted? The real question about it is this something that could only happen in your town? The challenge is, chili cook-offs are a lot of fun. We've worked with folks that are running them, but they really can happen anywhere. But when you have a festival that's built around one thing that your town or your community actually has, it could be a special river, a special orchard, a vineyard, the one weird claim to fame that you have. For us, we work with Douglas, Wyoming, and they are the home of the jackalope. And I'm not sure, has anybody, and we got Chad over here. Has anybody heard of a jackalope? Do you know what a jackalope is? I remember growing up and being like, oh, I remember what a jackalope is, but I didn't
What
know
is
where it
it?
was actually from.
Looks like Liz
Yeah,
knows
let's
what
say,
a
does that,
jackalope is.
yeah, let's see. Does anybody? I was gonna say, Liz, there. The jackalope is a rabbit that has antlers on it, and it's from Douglas, Wyoming. And according to Douglas, Wyoming, Danielle, it's supposedly not a make-believe animal. They are very certain that this is a real thing out in Douglas, Wyoming. And they've built their identity and they've built their events around it. And so that's something. So when we talk about rooted, that's rooted. Rooted are things that are very hard to copy, but very easy to come back to. So when they do events or festivals, it's usually revolving around their jackalope. So that's where when we think about something rooted, that's rooted. But the other part is, does it run without heroics? And I'm sure many, if not all, even ourselves have felt this way. It's where you've got beloved events that year over year depend on one exhausted person, maybe two, and 40 volunteers, some of whom are quietly aging out. And the only reason it's able to happen is because you or maybe another person on your staff burns themselves out every single year. And the hard part is these are the types of things that ultimately, in the long run, don't necessarily become repeatable. You're borrowing against your own staff, and repeatable in this situation just means the machine. Well, repeatable for us is that we want it to be a machine that can survive you going on vacation or you having a sick day. If it's something that can't run without your heroics, that's ultimately really a big challenge as well. And then the other big thing is, can you tell if it worked? And this is a hard question because how can you actually tell if it worked? Not, the eyeball test. It felt busy. Weather was great. Do you actually know? Because more often than not, we're running on vibes and maybe a head count that someone guessed at. And so one of the ways, and completely different, was we worked with a food festival, and the way they picked their most popular dish, it wasn't like voting or any of this, and this was in the past before we were working together. The way they picked their most popular dish was at the end of the event. So this was a food festival, it was on Main Street, it's great, they have lots of vendors, was by hand counting how many plates, paper plates, were left at each vendor at the end of the event. So call it 10 o'clock at night. Nick, how many plates did you have left? And he's like sitting there, one, two, three, and trying to count and pull off these plates. If it rained, if they're stuck together, it's just that was how they did it. And then they ultimately found out that vendors realized they could just throw out their plates, and those with the fewest, because they'd never really tried to do none. They didn't really want to sell out, but those with the fewest would be the winners. So like for us, like how are you going to measure that it worked? Should it be something that takes heroics, or is it something that you're actually going to be able to point to at the very end? And so for us, the challenge that we've seen is that most of us can't answer usually test three. And that fundamentally becomes the whole problem for a lot of communities here, is that they have a really hard time being able to point to, hey, this actually worked. Sometimes the eyeball test is good enough, but then it really can be hard when you're putting those grants together, when you're trying to report back to your board. All those things ultimately become a challenge. So for us, we've got three different downtowns that I'm just going to briefly go through, but we'll take a little look at them, and three different tests. And these are ones that, these are ones that we're fortunate enough to both work with and then also we'll say collaborate with, because we're going to point to ones that did work, and then we're going to point to ones that necessarily didn't. And that's the other thing as well, is we want to be able to point to that these aren't necessarily all wins. And it is something that you possibly have experienced as well. So these are going to be things that you might have been able to do, and then these are also going to be the ones that you also may have felt yourself. So Ithaca, New York, they've got this great apple harvest festival. It runs annually. I think they're getting ready for will be their 44th year. So this began in 1982. Originally, what it was actually an agricultural showcase, and it looked like a farmer's market. It wasn't an actual farmer's market, but it was actual an agricultural showcase that they brought downtown. They've got their Ithaca Commons. So they had something that was a little bit rooted in their downtown. They had the commons. They wanted to do an agricultural showcase because they've got a lot of farmland around it. And so it was organized by the Downtown Ithaca Alliance. It started just as a single day. Now it's a 3-day festival. It's going to be running again this September. It covers almost 5 downtown blocks. So it's actually gone outside of their commons. And they've got over 200 vendors. I think last year they had 225, maybe 250. It's an incredible festival. It's vibrant and the community loves it. And the reality is the growers were already there. So the event grew out of Ithaca, rather than being imported. So when we think of something that's rooted, this is an example of a really great rooted festival or a really great rooted event. And the numbers are, well, one of them is verifiable. One is more of a qualitative eyeball test. But the longevity of the event is their hard fact. It's been continuous since 1982, and they did have a pause a few years back, but they are back and better than ever. And for them, the 100,000 is actually an organizer estimate. So one of their board members, when they were being interviewed about this, they had pointed to that the prior year they estimated that they drew over 100,000 to 110,000 over 3 days. These were sort of small anecdotal between parking and restaurants and all those different types of things. That's really where they were able to eyeball it. So it was more of an organizer estimate. And it's hard because they want this repeat data year in, year out. But it's a festival that clearly does well. It's clearly rooted in the community. So it is something in many ways that does what we'll see here at the end is it does pass some of our tests. So it is something that you should keep doing and that you should repeat year in, year out. Now, the tough one to contrast that is there's a New Jersey downtown that we work with, and they hosted two shopping season events. They'd actually seen in another community that a spring fling and a back to school event would be really, really valuable to use. And they're like, hey, we've got shops, we've got a downtown. Let's just throw this thing together. And it's a very polite way of throwing it together because it's kind of how they did it, and I think Nick can attest to that. It just kind of felt very, very slapdash. But the other side of it is they did have the plans, they did have the merchants on board. And by and large, from our side of things, we're like, hey, like this looks like it was set up for success. They even had great incentives, gift cards, local rewards. And it was one of those things where you're like, hey, like this should work. But the hard part was it wasn't rooted in their community. It was going to take a lot of heroics. And what we saw was that it just ultimately didn't really work. And it was disappointing to us, for us, from our side of things, we're always sad when events don't perform the way that we want to. Weather was a factor. Spring fling was cold. Back to school ended up being rainy. Those are things that are outside of your control. But the hard part was the organizers then questioned whether shopping incentives were compelling enough to incentivize what they considered an affluent community. So for some of the folks that might be here, you might be experiencing those same things, or even may think of your communities the exact same way. But the problem is they just saw this format elsewhere and just did a straight copy and paste. And it wasn't something that was rooted. It took a lot of heroics, and they just were really hoping ultimately that it was going to work. And so, and exactly. And so that's the hard part, is that we wanted to tell them like, hey, like maybe if we change it, maybe if we could, adjust it a little bit. But, and I'm sure some of you experience it as well, as their board, or in their case, a mayor was like, you know what, it doesn't work. I've always said shopping does not work. We're never going to do this again. And so for them now, they're looking at other ideas and other things to do, but that was it. They just decided that we're not going to do it anymore. And really, ultimately, what happens is the format can travel. That format can be anywhere. But the problem ultimately is, and on both sides of it, both for the organizers and for the folks that are participating, motivation really cannot. So it's trying to figure out, how do we get people that are motivated and want to do and participate in these events? So for us, we're very fortunate. We work with a few different areas out in Ohio. One of the ones that we work with is considered a suburb of Columbus, and they run a self-guided trail, an ice cream trail, and they have 8 different participating ice cream shops, because their area is actually known for having fun, cute, and eclectic local ice cream. It's just something it's an identity for their particular community. Although I'm sure most of us here probably have, local ice cream stores, and I would imagine really, really good ones. I know, like even downtown for us, we've got some great ice cream shops, but those are something that oftentimes, when it's run by, a local business owner, somebody that's rooted in the community, that possesses the identity of the community, that's like where it really shines through. And this was a trail that they ran last year, in 2025, digitally. The prior year, they'd actually run it through a paper passport. And what was interesting for both of those years is that it's had a great deal of success. I think it doubled in numbers from one year to the next. But the other interesting thing as well is, by making it more measurable, by going from paper to digital, they were able actually now to see who started it, who stopped it, who can they encourage to come back, because now they can get a sense of like how much broader, how much more broad the participation actually can be. And so what they were able to see is that now they have verifiable numbers from their 2025 data. They had 858 participants, over 2,000 check-ins, and almost 150 people completed and went to all 8 shops. This is not information that, that's on a leaderboard or anything like that. This is information that they keep internally, but the 8 shops for them have loved participating. They've actually been able to see, it's almost been like a pseudo contest of who's getting the most visits, because now that they can actually share that sort of internally, it makes it a lot more fun. And one of the other things is the coffee shops. They have a handful of coffee shops as well. So like, hey, can we do a coffee one? Like, is this something where we can get, the coffee shops involved as well? Not ice cream and coffee, because that's the other thing too that's always interesting, is you don't want to overwhelm people, but you want to kind of keep them a little bit separate here. So what's really nice is that these tangible metrics help shed light not only if a program appears successful, because the thing is, the year before they ran it on paper, and it worked well, but they're like, hey, it worked well enough. It's worked well enough in the past. Like, let's get some more empirical evidence. But it helps dive deeper into the why. So for them, it was it was a program that was rooted in something local and fun. Um, Thankfully, it didn't take sorry, I've got a puppy over here. It didn't take something heroic to get off the ground. Um, and ultimately they're able to measure it. So they can point to all those different things, and it ultimately becomes a huge community win. So for us and for them, it's something that we've ultimately been really excited about and really proud of, that we've been able to support an event like this. That now that they've done it once, they're trying out different trails and looking to expand it. But with that being said, they're also very mindful of the fact that they don't want to have what they were saying is passport fatigue. We always, as a no app or non-app company, we always have app fatigue. But the other thing that they're also mindful of is what they would call passport or trail fatigue or event fatigue. Is they don't want to have something where there's just so many things that there's the paralysis of choice, and people are like, you know what, I have too many choices, and so I'm not going to do
Mhm.
any. So for them, that's been another thing that they can pick. They can actually look at the cadence. When are people checking in? So it's really important to them to be able to figure it out that way. So for the folks that are here, you don't have to say this out loud. It's more keep it in mind. But like when you think about the things that are on your calendar, like which one of those tests does it fail? Is it going to be, does it fail one? Does it fail two? Does it fail three? Hopefully it doesn't fail all three, but it might. And that's something that's really important, that we want you to be able to we want you to be able to think about as as you look backwards as well. And so this is where at the beginning I mentioned that there was going to be three words that I want you to hold on to. So if you want to screenshot this would be a great spot to do so. But my hope is that from this, from this chat today, that this is the most useful and the biggest takeaway for you is that three tests now become three decisions that you can make. If it passes all three, keep it. Keep it and protect it. If it's going to pass some, grow it. Also, yeah, I was gonna say also great there, Ani. So if anybody needs to come back to it, we can always come back to it as well. But if you wanted to do a quick screenshot right now, that would be perfect too. But
Yeah.
grow it. Grow the part that's grow the part that's rooted. Fix the part that isn't. That's okay. Or it fails unrooted. If it fails unrooted or you can't tell, you know what? Sometimes, as I've got a almost 4 year old and a an almost 2 year old, let it go. If it fails unrooted or you can't tell, I'm sorry. There's been too much frozen in this house. I swear I didn't want to be too cliche or too hokey, and I know I swear it wasn't planned out, but I was going to say, but if it fails on one of those, just let it go. Or at the same time, maybe shrink it until you can, because there's there are other ways to do it without ultimately having to drop it. You can think of other ideas, but it might be something that is important. And the hard part is when you are letting go of something beloved, you're going to be making a local decision and about an event that might have whether it's whether it's got a lot of fans or just a few, or maybe there's an organizer that you need to talk with, and it's a really hard discussion to have. And the move isn't really to kill it per se, but you're reframing the conversation for everybody that might be involved. And it really might be for the board, not that this failed, but really this isn't rooted in us, and here's what will grow instead. And changing that language around really can help reframe it both for the people that are supporting you and for the people that are ultimately trying to run these things. So what's also really nice as well is that you can give the board these three tests as a shared language. And that's always a really important thing to think about for any organization, is that is having that common language so that it's not personal. It's not a personal thing. We're not killing it, although I'm sure, and we've heard it, and without diving into places or names, and we've heard from other places where sometimes decisions do feel personal, but when you can point to something like this, it does remove that personal from the equation. And it's also yeah, as I say, I know I put it in the chat here, but it's also okay to you don't have to answer that last question, but if you have one of those things in mind, like definitely bank it in the back of definitely bank it in the back of your mind. And so, when we go back to the beginning, and I'm gonna, scroll up here, is we were talking about like what makes a downtown great. People were saying walkable, mixed use, lots of things to do for everyone, storefronts, green spaces, restaurants and bars, like energy and vibrancy. the interesting thing is that you weren't necessarily talking about events. You weren't pointing to one event. You were pointing to what makes your community your community. And there's that sense of what your community brings where, you feel it helps create a sense of people feeling like they belong. And so when we think about events, it's not that events shouldn't happen or anything like that. It's more a great downtown isn't a calendar of events. It's creating that feeling of belonging using exactly what we just talked about before of ultimately what makes a great downtown. Because repeatable programming is how a visitor, even if they might be a local, becomes a regular. Somebody that might be living on the outskirts of town, but now they're going to be frequent it more. So it's then when we think about our calendars, it's not a calendar of one-offs. It becomes really a year-round relationship, and the events are the invitation. The belonging is what makes them come back. Is what makes them come back on their own. And as we were saying before, the constraint has never been ideas. It was possibly, your capacity and knowing what actually landed. And really that's our hope of what the three tests is going to expose is, trying to point out, is the being rooted, heroics. Are you able to measure things? Because ultimately, really what has happened is a lot has changed in the past few years. There's really been three, there have been three shifts. Not, each one of these are the only shifts that have happened, but there have been three shifts, and each tied back to a test that we were talking about. You can answer visitor questions without staffing a visitor booth or an info tent during your event, and that's a capacity thing. Being able to free up people to do other things. That's a really important thing for organizations. You can actually know what people ask or what they want. And when you start seeing themes, trends within questions or searches, that's a rooted signal if it's pointing to something that people really desire. Now, of course, we disregarding some of the nonsense questions, I'm sure there are questions you're like, all right, like you got that one person that keeps asking for the same thing. You're like, all right, we get it. It's probably not something that's necessarily for us, but that's something that you can let go by the wayside. And then the last thing is, being able to have more verified participation instead of a guessed head count, really answers that last test, making it all measurable. And that's, a really important thing to be thinking about and to consider, consider when you're thinking about these repeatable events. And so sort of as a full disclosure, and Nick and I will be talking about happy to answer more about what we do at the end, but this is the stuff that we work on day in day out. And our platform is called Writer. We do consider ourselves an information booth in people's pockets, and we're here to we're here to answer any questions that might be about it, taking info that you have and making it available for your customers. But we're just one example of what's possible. And so we're always here, we're always happy to be sounding boards, especially if you're exploring different platforms and things like that. And so, if anyone does have any questions, whether it's privately after the chat, we would be happy to answer them. But I think I went backwards, and there we go. Now I want to go forwards. But before we go into any of that, and I don't want to say that you've got homework, but the next thing that what we would love for you to do, and I'll call it homework. Go put my teacher hat back on. I've got an assignment that before your next event, even if even for these really great annual ones, run it through some of these tests. See if it passes all three. See which ones you want to keep, which ones you want to grow, and ultimately which ones you want to let go. Because I think what's going to be really interesting is that when you really dive deep into them, is that these are the answers to those questions is what's going to allow you to shape what's ultimately going to make a much more repeatable downtown. Because as you just dig just a little bit deeper, it's going to peel back some of those layers that we think or that we hope will will help you shape the events and the experiences. And I know I've been kind of using those interchangeably, and that's the other interesting thing as well, is like I don't want people to just necessarily think of events, but also exploration experiences, other things that might go outside of your traditional events, your traditional festivals. These are the things that may and we hope will make your downtown a much more repeatable place. And so if there's any questions, we would love to answer them right now. Feel free to feel free to share, where your challenges might be. We can walk through it together. Again, if not, we're also happy to do that. Well, I would say, offline or chat in any sort of other in any other sort of way. But yeah, we just really repeat it, really repeat it. We really appreciate it, and we're hoping that we can help you create a repeatable downtown here.
I have a quick question for you, and then there's another question in the chat. But have you worked with any communities that have like, a hiking trail or a, natural trail that, they might not necessarily have like the biggest downtown, but have used that as their rooted experience to kind of explore other ways to have people do that repeatable visit?
Yeah, so what's so interesting for us is for places that, especially, we do work with a lot of rural communities that do have outdoor hiking, and knowing that there sometimes is that one central location that people are going to be parking, or where, a trailhead or things like that. And so for them, what they've done is they've leveraged being able to put assets not only at the trailhead, but at certain points along the trail, so that letting people know, looking for something to do after your hike, looking for a spot to grab a drink. They've actually essentially, I don't want to call it advertising, but they're marketing themselves along the trail by also being useful as well. So by helping
Mhm.
people, know, by also helping them show the trail path by using it, creating it in a more visual way, they've put QR codes along the path, but which is the way that they've connected with them. But they've essentially turned that around where it's like, hey, we're being helpful, but we're also encouraging them. We're giving them an opportunity to come downtown after their hike, knowing that they might be tired, hungry, or tired, hungry, or thirsty after a long hike or an exciting day.
All right. Here's a question. We have several successful events. The challenge is turning these visitors events into deeper economic development. How do you make that translation?
Yeah. So, and again, and I don't want to be the only one. Nick, feel free to answer any of the ones that are coming through as well, if you feel like they're more in your wheelhouse. But the interesting thing for some of these communities is where they have done. We had a community that was running. They had been doing we'll call it like a pizza trail from year in, year out, and then they shifted gear, and it had been very successful. But they knew that they had had essentially what would call like a Rolodex, participants who were excited to do more, but they saw a gap in their calendar, and they created a holiday cocktail trail that bridged the gap between Thanksgiving to the New Year. And for them, what they did was that they made it so that there was now more of a cadence of things that people were going to be getting excited about, outside of the fact that there were incentives. And what they actually saw was that it wasn't actually during the trail timeframe that people they knew that during the holiday season, people were going to spend, but that people were still coming back in January and February, because of the experiences that they had had with places that they didn't necessarily know of at the beginning. So for us, I know it's tying it back into the trail aspect of it, but where it was going back to the deeper economic development was the fact that it was exposing people to places that they hadn't been to before. Because sometimes when it's a loyalty-based program, I'm going to go to the same place 12 times in a row. But when it's getting people to experience other places within a community, that's ultimately where it's allowed for there to be that sort of deeper economic development for people to explore more. And that was one of the things that they were really excited about, was seeing that the businesses could point to a better January, especially ones that were off the beaten path, because there's always that question. It's like, what have you done for me lately from your local businesses? And that was
Yeah.
that was a helpful thing for them. Now, it does, of course, expect the business to live up to that standard, but that was something that helped with growing local economic development there.
Well, going off of that, right? we have a question that says, can you expand a little more about passport and trail fatigue, right? So you're saying that they went from one event to another. Are there any examples of communities that have pivoted or tried other programming outside the passport and trails, right? I know in my community we have those passports, and sometimes you just like throw it to the side, right? Or it's,
Mhm.
oh, come and go to all these different places. But what are some other examples of programming that have brought people in without having to download an app?
Yeah, I was just saying, fortunately for us, always at the end of the day is our biggest thing is that, we always avoid people having to download an app. But one of even just pointing back to Douglas, is I want to say that they had run one fall, they ran back to back, maybe like back to back to back passport events where they had gone from a scarecrow contest, like a scarecrow voting contest where people were going to different businesses and voting on their favorite scarecrows. And I forget exactly which one followed next, but it was like a post-Halloween one that was in the lead up to Thanksgiving and Small Business Saturday. And so it was one where it was like back to back to back to back, and people were like, all right, I can only be expected to go out so many times. And so where sort of the passport fatigue can happen is not only when they're like some of them where it's like in a very, very short time frame and they're running, on top of each, almost either concurrently or right back to back to back, is what they ended up doing is they actually expanded how some of the passport, well, even the event styles, that they've expanded how long they can run for, which made it more manageable for people that want to participate. And they didn't make it something where it was like as where it was as spotty, or it was just like, I got to do this all in the moment, and there's a lot of stress and there's a lot of FOMO involved. And so for them, they expanded it a little bit. They opened it up for the length of time and to let that breathe, while also then sprinkling in some for them again for Douglas with their Jackalope events, but sprinkling in some of the more rooted events. So that was a way that they pivoted from doing too many passports, but having something that's able to breathe a little bit more, and then to have some local events that are more that more past the test that we were talking about here.
So this is pretty relatable, I think, to pretty much everybody, right? Somebody wrote, none of our events have been set up to be measurable, which is a problem, right? We want to know how many people are coming. But a lot of communities have aging residents, right? And
Hmm.
so this person's saying whenever we set up things to have QR codes, online info, credit card payment, they get a lot of pushback, which, I know
Yeah.
here in Connecticut, we have a
Yeah.
lot of Asian communities. It's
Yeah.
actually becoming like a very big thing, right? And so what is a good way to address that?
Yeah.
Yeah, I
So
can take this
go
one,
ahead.
Matt.
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, and it's a great question. It's one that Matt and I see a lot of the times. We
Yeah.
work with a lot of different communities that, some are, younger communities that we work with, and everyone has their iPhone or their Android and is, comfortable with technology and scanning a QR code. And there's certainly communities that are older and don't have an iPhone, or don't feel comfortable with scanning a QR code, or putting credit card information through a website or the phone or whatever it might be. So yeah, it's a great one. It's one that we've worked on quite a bit. And I think what we've come to make sure that we're supporting everyone is by allowing, individuals that are older, that are not comfortable with scanning and using their phone to use the QR codes, is by text messaging. And so what we've done is a lot of communities like yourselves, the ones that are on the line here today, have a wealth of information that are on your websites, a wealth of information for the events and the festivals that you have. But again, the challenge becomes some individuals don't want to have to scan something to find out what all that information is. And so what we've done is communities now can use our platform to text message directly, which is a much more comfortable method for a lot of older folks to have a number that goes directly to your downtown, your main street, your business improvement district, and to be able to ask your community directly through text, what's going on? When's that local festival taking place? When is that passport program starting?
Mhm.
How do I understand which businesses are participating? And so the text message aspect of what we've done, just to help a lot of the communities that do have folks that don't want to have to scan or use QR codes or do payments through different applications, we've allowed folks now to text directly, which has been a really powerful way for folks to interact with the wealth of information that you put through your website or any type of event or platform that you're promoting during the year, to be able to just text directly, right? Sometimes it's hard, and I think Ani and others can attest. You get a lot of questions throughout the day, throughout the week. You might be on vacation, there's the phone's ringing and there's voicemails that you're trying to get back to, or even the events that you are hosting, there might be an event booth where you're fielding a lot of questions. And so we try and take that burden off of folks too, whether it's the folks that do feel great with technology or they don't, by providing the SMS texting feature now too, to field all those questions for communities, which also help leaders like yourself understand too, to Matt's point, what's working, what are people wanting to get out of these experiences that you might not have an answer to, or the text message feature might not have an answer to, because it's not part of what you're marketing and telling folks too. And so that's been a really powerful tool for us to help communities understand, hey, why isn't this ice cream shop on the Passport Trail this year? Or, we loved the, coffee passport style program, even though it was 2 weeks outside of the ice cream trail. I think that's something that we want to understand why it's not happening for this year. So, that's a part of the program too, that's helped older folks that, don't feel comfortable with getting information digitally, but engaging with your local community, with leaders like yourselves through a text message platform, is what we've also introduced recently.
Oh, that's great. I thought of something as you were speaking. I'm not in my community specifically, and I'm sure other ones as well. How do you kind of pinpoint what the root is, like the rooted reason for people? So we have, almost too many events, right, throughout the year that are specific to where I live, right? And so it's, this person's coming here for the Pirate Festival, or this person's coming for an oyster. How do you have to pick one event or one thing that is your root, or the rooted part of your event pulling in, or can you use multiple, right? Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think Nick, I know you're nodding here too, but I would say, you can definitely use multiple ones, and it's what when we think about rooted, it doesn't have to be something as what I would say is as esoteric as having sort of a jackalope, which is just so unique and so specific to that community, but where is it something that has grown and blossomed over time? And even just thinking about Ithaca is like, from one perspective, is that they used their commons. That was something that is part of their community. And then for them, knowing that there was the agricultural aspect that came from outside of the community. So there are a few different things that allowed them to point to the identity of the festival that now is massive, but pointed to the festival that the roots really grew with the community, and made it something and ultimately have made it something unique and special over time. So when we do think of roots, it doesn't just have to be one. It doesn't just have to be one thing, and it doesn't just have to be as super specific as potentially the example that I was using before.
And going back to Ithaca, one question I had was like, you said it started off as like an agricultural showcase, and then it kind of grew into 5 different parts of the city, right? Like 5 different neighborhoods of the downtown. How did they go about that? How did they get that to spread? I think that that's like a big issue, right? Where a lot of communities will have an event and it will grow, but they want to have that connectivity to the other parts of the downtown.
Yeah. Yeah, I think what ultimately started happening, and we've actually experienced this with some of the other communities that we work with, especially what we would call a vendor-driven event, where they've got those exhibitors and they've got those booths, is that there was that scarcity at the start, is that they could only use the commons. So for the people that applied, eventually that, when it became an application process, is that, it was something that was very specific. It was something that was very valuable for the people that were participating. Like, hey, like, this is a great event. The crowd started growing, so the vendors needed to start growing. And now, it certainly can be a chicken or the egg thing depending on the community, but what ultimately had started was they had a lot of really great vendors. and they were able to be also persistent. And I think, that possibly, when it was mentioned in the chat, is like one data point doesn't just, say, scrap it or, scrap it or keep it, is the fact that, they saw that there was something special there. And so they knew that this was worth being consistent about on a yearly basis. And that's when they started seeing it grow. They had a lot of great vendors. The crowds responded accordingly. And year upon year, they had more vendors apply. They got constrained. They were turning people away. And so it became something where they needed to use more space. So that's really where it became sort of this domino effect of what had started on, essentially one little downtown street or thoroughfare that eventually, takes over the entire downtown of Ithaca.
Well, so with one of the things, right, is with our Main Street America methodology, right, is that we encourage people to have a managed downtown. So for your Ithaca example, like, who is the they? Who is the one pushing this all through? I know there's probably, parts of like needing to get permitting, right? And police and flaggers and all of that. So like in your experience of talking to all these different communities and working with them, who is the they?
Yeah, it really can depend from community to community, depending, and that's where when we go back towards the heroics of it. Is where is the they going to be that person from time to time? For Ithaca, they've grown into both a bigger and a collaborative organization where it is downtown Ithaca that's running it, but they do have a local visitor bureau that they partner with. When I was talking about the food festival down in where they were doing the paper plate counting, that's been one that's grown year over year as well. And what had started out as a Main Street program also brought in their local tourism visitor bureau and their local chamber of commerce. Now, not saying that that's going to be typical in every community that other organizations are going to want to, or even that you might want them to participate. But what happened is that the success of this program, and I think what was great as well, of what Danielle was saying, setting goals before it, is that they had these goals in mind. And when they started hitting their goals and they started hitting their targets, so the they that I'm talking about was the Main Street organization, which was just a small organization. Once they were able to hit those targets, they were able to essentially bring in other organizations for them. And I know it's a very vague to say them so many times
Yes.
here. But for Lexington, they were able to bring in other organizations. For Ithaca, they were able to partner with other organizations, knowing that they were going to Ithaca and Lexington were going to need that separate support over time. So something that started small and started manageable. Once they realized that it needed that extra help, that's where they leveraged community support. And it does take a community that wants to make it happen, but communities that do care about these programs, about the events. And I'm sure for the folks that are here, that you can think about the events that are great in your town that people just want to come back for. People are willing to go to bat for it, but it shouldn't be at the sake. One thing I would say is, the caveat, it shouldn't be at the sake of your health or mental sanity, because if it's still like, yeah, they're going to bat, but are they really helping you? Or are you just managing more people? So being able to accomplish more, to sort of make it a bit more horizontal, that's really what has allowed both Ithaca and Lexington down in Virginia to do more with their communities.
Got it. So I'm going to just ask one last question I have here in the chat, and then we'll wrap up. It says, how can these events best translate to repeat visitations without the event? For example, point to a year-round business, maps, unique retail, other unknown draws to bring people back.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
One of the, I think
go ahead.
I'm sorry, Mac. Go ahead.
Nope.
Yeah, and I think what Matt talked about earlier is, it's not the event itself, right? I think what we want to do and what a lot of these communities want is the event or the passport or whatever festival you're putting together is the catalyst for people to come back year round. It's a way to remind people that there's a lot of great things going on in your community, where the ice cream trail or the restaurant week or the beer trail that you have are all things that showcase how great the community is and all these things that you're able to participate in year round. And so, for us in the communities that we work with, a lot of it's about using the tools and using these different types of events that you have going on in the community to remind people too of all the things that people can experience in their downtown communities throughout the course of the year. Really, these events are always a really good catalyst and a draw to remind folks of why the town and your community is great to begin with. Matt, I know you want to add a point there, but that was, in our
Yeah,
experience, it's really
that's
the push to tell people and remind them that we have all these special things going on in our community. This is not for you to just come to the ice cream trail once or go to a couple different ice cream places. To help you understand and remind you that this is a place that you can come back to over the summer and not just this one
Yeah.
time.
Yeah, I definitely think that that's, the exposing people to what's, to that uniqueness, to that character. I think, we think of the character of our towns and getting people that are excited about it. And that's why I think, when we point to the shopping one is like, I don't want to say shopping because there can be some really great local identity shopping style events. But when it is just like, this is shopping, come downtown,
Yeah,
that
that makes sense.
there needs to be something that reminds people like, oh, okay, like, well, granted, that I wouldn't do this on any other day, but also that this couldn't happen in any other location. That this downtown, this is the reason why that this is happening, because it's got these really, whether it's great stores, really, whether it's great cultural experiences, what have you. And when it reminds people, when it creates that sense of that feeling in people, that's where those repeatable things can happen. And it does, and it does take time. Of course, it isn't purely overnight, but that would be where I would piggyback on what Nick was saying was, where it becomes that catalyst. It sparks that sense of uniqueness and brings forth that character of your community. That really does help
Great.
in the long run.
All right. If you guys don't mind just putting your emails into the chat so everybody could have that. And I'm just going to
I'll
finish
stop
this.
share. Yeah.
Okay.
There you go.
Okay. So, let's see here. So, we invite you to join the 100+ communities around the state committed to improving their Main Street by becoming a member of the Connecticut Main Street Center. As a member, you'll receive exclusive help and resources to help your downtown work. Again, please visit ctmainstreet.org to learn more. Did it change? There we go. So we have some upcoming events. We have Spotlight on Main in Bethel, Connecticut on September 10th. Come to see how Bethel's historic downtown blends with the old with the new, right? Learn how alignment between Bethel's Economic Development Office and Chamber of Commerce is creating opportunities for small businesses and strengthening networks. Art, culture, and events are also drawing tourists to Bethel, creating visibility and momentum downtown. Also, we have our September webinar set up, Showtime on Main. Downtown is a theater, and every local business is a stage. This webinar is going to help your local programs and businesses recast the light that they see themselves with. And then also join Connecticut Main Street Center, Advanced CT, and Connecticut Municipal Development Authority and CETUS on September 23rd in Norwich, Connecticut. They're going to be having an economic development partnership summit to learn about how 4 statewide economic development organizations can support your municipality's growth, business attraction, workforce initiatives, and community development. We really hope to see you guys at one or all of our events that are coming up. And also, once again, we thank Liberty Bank Foundation for supporting our webinar series. When you exit this webinar, you'll be prompted to complete an evaluation for this presentation. Please, please, please take a moment to share your thoughts. It really helps us shape our programming so it's the most valuable to you. And that concludes today's webinar, and I hope everyone has a great day.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having us today. Appreciate it, everybody.
Take care, everyone.
Thank you.